heat, blood, and reckoning. In the scorching summer of 1882, a dying woman collapses on a stranger's porch with 2 children and a secret worth killing for. Rancher Gideon Hale thought silence could bury his past, until 3 desperate souls shattered it forever. One gunfight, one choice, one family that refused to die quietly. If you're ready for a story of survival, justice, and second chances under the unforgiving Western sun, stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and comment your city below. I want to see how far this tale travels across the world. The heat came first, not the comfortable warmth of spring mornings or the slow burn of autumn afternoons, but the kind of heat that cracked earth and bent horizons, that turned the Wyoming grasslands into a shimmering sea of gold and dust. It was the 3rd week of July, and the sun hammered down on Gideon Hale's ranch like divine punishment, relentless and unforgiving. Gideon stood on his porch, shirt plastered to his back, watching the horizon ripple with heat waves. 42 years old, lean as fence wire, with shoulders carved from years of hauling water and mending fence lines alone. His face told the story of a man who'd stopped expecting good things, creased at the corners, shadowed beneath the brim of his hat, mouth set in a permanent line that might once have known how to smile. He didn't smile anymore. The ranch sprawled across 200 acres of rolling grassland and rocky hills, bounded on 3 sides by stands of pine and a creek that was barely a trickle this time of year. Cattle grazed in whatever shade they could find. The barn needed paint. The corral fence sagged in 2 places. Gideon noticed these things the way a man notices his own scars. Familiar, accepted, no longer worth fixing. He lived alone. Had for 6 years. No hired hands, no neighbors close enough to matter, no woman to fill the silence that pooled in every corner of the cabin like standing water. Just Gideon, the cattle, and the wind that never quite stopped blowing across the high plains. He turned to go inside when he saw it, a shape on the road, dark against the pale dust, moving slowly. Gideon's hand dropped to the rifle leaning against the porch rail, fingers brushing the worn stock. Visitors were rare. Unexpected visitors were trouble. The shape resolved as it drew closer. Not a rider. People on foot. 3 of them. His jaw tightened. They staggered more than walked, weaving like drunkards across the rutted track that passed for a road. The largest figure, a woman, he could see now, lurched forward with mechanical determination, one arm wrapped around something clutched to her chest. Behind her, a smaller figure kept pace, reaching out whenever the woman stumbled. Gideon watched them approach, every instinct screaming at him to go inside, bar the door, pretend he'd seen nothing. But he didn't move. The woman made it to within 50 feet of the porch before her legs gave out. She went down hard, knees striking the earth, head bowing forward. The bundle in her arms, a child, small and still, nearly spilled from her grasp before she caught it, curling her body around the little girl protectively, even as consciousness slipped away from her. "Ma!" The boy's voice cracked with terror and exhaustion. He dropped beside the woman, hands on her shoulders, shaking her. "Ma, get up. We're here. We made it. Ma!" Gideon moved without thinking, boots hitting the porch steps, crossing the yard in long strides. He took in details as he approached. The woman's clothes filthy and torn, her dark hair matted with dust and sweat, lips cracked and bleeding. The little girl in her arms couldn't have been more than 4 or 5, unconscious, her face flushed scarlet with fever. The boy was older, 9, maybe 10, dressed in clothes too big for his frame, eyes huge and a sun-darkened face. Those eyes locked on Gideon as he approached, and the boy surged to his feet, putting himself between the stranger and his family. "Don't touch them." The boy's voice shook but held firm. His hands were empty, no weapon, but his stance said he'd fight anyway. I'll stop you." "Easy, son." Gideon's voice came out rougher than intended, unused to conversation. He held up both hands, showing they were empty. "I'm not here to hurt anyone." "Then help her." The boy's defiance crumbled, desperation flooding through. "Please, she's been sick for 2 days, won't wake up right. My sister's burning up. We walked for I don't know how long. Please." Gideon knelt beside the woman, pressed 2 fingers to her throat. Her pulse hammered rabbit quick and thready beneath skin that blazed with fever. She was bone-thin beneath her dress, and when he touched her forehead, the heat radiating from her skin made him flinch. How long since she had water? Yesterday morning. Creek we found was dried up. I gave the rest to Daisy. The boy's voice cracked. Is she gonna die? Gideon looked at the child, Daisy, still cradled in her mother's arms. The little girl's breathing came in shallow gasps, her skin flushed and dry. No sweat. That was bad. Very bad. He made his decision. No one's dying today. He slid his arms beneath the woman, lifting her with the practiced ease of a man used to hauling dead weight. She was lighter than he expected, nothing but skin and bone and fever heat. The little girl remained tucked against her mother's chest, small fingers knotted in the fabric of her mother's dress, even in unconsciousness. Follow me, he told the boy, already moving toward the cabin. Inside, the temperature dropped 20 degrees, the thick log walls and shuttered windows keeping out the worst of the summer heat. Gideon had rigged a ceiling fan above his bed, 4 wooden blades connected to a rope that ran through a pulley system, and the boy immediately understood, pulling the rope with steady rhythm until air began to move through the room. Gideon laid the woman on his bed, gently extracting the little girl from her arms. Up close, he could see the resemblance. Same dark hair, same delicate bone structure. Mother and daughter. There's a pump in the kitchen, he said to the boy without looking up. Fill the basin. Bring every clean cloth you can find. The boy ran. Gideon worked quickly, unbuttoning the woman's collar to help with cooling, checking her pulse again. Still too fast. Her breathing was shallow, rattling slightly in her chest. Heat stroke, dehydration, possibly pneumonia on top of it. The little girl was worse. Her fever had to be pushing 105, and her skin was so dry it felt like paper. The boy returned with a sloshing basin and an armful of rags. His efficiency surprised Gideon. No wasted motion, no questions, just swift obedience born from necessity. What's your name? Gideon asked as he soaked a cloth and began sponging the woman's face and neck. Luke. Luke Callan. The boy hesitated. That's my ma, Mara. My sister's Daisy. I'm Gideon Hale. This is my ranch. He handed Luke a wet cloth. Wipe down your sister's arms and legs. Gently. We need to bring her fever down slow. They worked in synchronized silence, the only sounds the creak of the ceiling fan and the soft drip of water being wrung from rags. Gideon had done this before. Nursed fever, fought dehydration, but never for strangers who'd collapsed on his doorstep like gifts from a vengeful sky. After 20 minutes, Mara's eyelids fluttered. Her lips moved, forming soundless words. Ma! Luke dropped his cloth, leaning over her. Ma, can you hear me? Her eyes opened, dark brown, unfocused, swimming with confusion and fever. They moved across the unfamiliar ceiling, the strange walls, before landing on Gideon's face hovering above her. She tried to jerk away, panic flooding her features. Easy. Gideon kept his voice low, steady. You're safe. You collapsed outside. I brought you in. Daisy. Her voice was a ruined whisper, raw as sandpaper. Right here, Ma. Luke pressed his sister's small hand into their mother's palm. She's okay. He's helping us. Mara's fingers closed around her daughter's hand with desperate strength. Her eyes, clearer now, fixed on Gideon with an intensity that caught him off guard. Where? She coughed, wincing. Where are we? My ranch. About 40 miles south of Buffalo. Gideon lifted a tin cup to her lips. Drink. Slow. She obeyed, taking small sips that turned into greedy gulps before he pulled the cup away. Slow, I said. You'll make yourself sick. How long? Another cough. How long were we walking? You tell me. Luke answered for her. 3 weeks, maybe more. Lost count after the first town. 3 weeks. On foot. In this heat. With 2 children. Gideon's jaw tightened, but he kept his expression neutral. Where'd you start from? Mara's eyes shuttered closed. Doesn't matter. Does if whoever you're running from comes looking. Her eyes snapped open, meeting his with sudden sharpness. Fear lived in those eyes, yes, but something harder too, something that had been forged in fire and hammered into steel. We're not running. Woman doesn't walk 3 weeks through summer heat with 2 children unless she's running from something. Gideon set the cup aside, wringing out another cloth. Question is whether that something is likely to show up on my doorstep. Mara held his gaze for a long moment. Then, slowly, deliberately, she looked away. We'll be gone by morning. You'll be dead by morning if you try walking in this heat. He pressed the cool cloth to her forehead, ignoring the way she stiffened. You and your daughter both. Heatstroke doesn't care how tough you think you are. We've imposed enough. Wasn't asking. Gideon stood, moving to where Daisy lay beside her mother. The little girl's fever had dropped slightly, but her breathing was still too shallow, her color too high. Your daughter needs at least 2 days of rest, water, and cooling. You need 3. After that, you do what you want. Luke looked between them, tension drawing his thin shoulders tight. Mara's mouth opened, then closed. She looked at her children. Luke exhausted but defiant, Daisy small and frighteningly still, and something in her face crumbled just slightly. 2 days, she whispered. Then we're gone. Gideon nodded once, already moving toward the door. I'll bring food. He left them there, mother and children huddled on his bed beneath the spinning ceiling fan, and walked into the brutal afternoon heat that felt almost cool compared to the fever furnace he'd just left. In the kitchen, he pumped water into a pot, set it on the stove to heat, found bread, butter, dried beef. Simple food, but it would do. His hands moved through familiar motions while his mind worked through unfamiliar problems. 3 weeks on foot. A woman and 2 children. Running from something bad enough to risk death in the summer heat. None of his business. He'd give them food, water, a place to rest. Then they'd leave, and his life would return to the quiet, solitary rhythm he'd built so carefully. Except the way Luke had stood between him and his family, shaking with exhaustion but unwilling to yield. The way Mara's fingers had gripped her daughter's hand even in semi-consciousness. The way neither of them had begged, though they clearly needed help desperately. Pride. Fierce, stubborn pride that recognized charity as another form of debt. Gideon understood that. He carried the food back to the bedroom on a wooden tray. Luke had managed to coax more water into Daisy, and the little girl's eyes were open now, huge and dark in her small face. She watched Gideon approach with the wary stillness of a wild thing ready to bolt. It's okay, Daisy girl. Mara's voice was stronger now, though still rough. He's helping us. Gideon set the tray on the bedside table, noting how all 3 of them tracked the food with hungry eyes. When was the last time they'd eaten a real meal? Luke, he nodded toward the tray. Feed your sister, small bites. Make sure she drinks between each one. The boy moved instantly, tearing bread into pieces, offering them to Daisy with a gentleness that spoke of long practice. The little girl ate slowly, mechanically, eyes never leaving Gideon's face. Mara tried to sit up, failed, and settled for propping herself on one elbow. Gideon handed her bread and butter without comment. Thank you. She said it quietly, but the words cost her something. Don't. He moved back toward the door. I'm doing what anyone would do. No. Her eyes held his. You're not. The silence stretched between them, heavy with things unsaid. Gideon broke it first. There's a lean-to out back with a cot. I'll sleep there. You and the children take the bed. Door locks from inside if that makes you feel safer. You don't have to. I'm not debating this. He was already moving, putting distance between himself and the strange, unfamiliar stirring in his chest. Rest. I'll check on you after evening chores. He left before she could respond, escaping into the familiar territory of work, feeding cattle, checking water troughs, mending the section of fence that had been sagging for 3 months. The sun crawled across the sky, brutal and bright. Sweat soaked through his shirt. His hands moved through practiced routines while his mind circled the same questions over and over. Who were they running from? What had driven a mother to risk her children's lives walking through summer heat? And why did the look in Mara Callan's eyes, that mixture of fear and steel, remind him so much of the face he used to see in the mirror, back before he'd learned to stop looking? By the time evening painted the sky in shades of copper and gold, Gideon had convinced himself that 2 days would pass quickly. They'd rest, recover, and move on. His life would return to normal. He almost believed it. Inside the cabin, he found Luke sitting watch beside the bed where his mother and sister slept. The boy's eyes were red-rimmed with exhaustion, but he straightened when Gideon entered, that familiar wariness returning. "You should sleep," Gideon said quietly. "Someone needs to stay awake in case—" Luke stopped himself. "In case what?" The boy's jaw set stubbornly. "In case." Gideon recognized the look. He'd worn it himself once, that determination to protect what was his, even when protection seemed impossible. "I'll keep watch tonight." He nodded toward the bed. "Lie down. That's not a request." Luke hesitated, clearly torn between exhaustion and duty. Finally, the exhaustion won. He climbed onto the far edge of the bed, careful not to disturb his mother and sister, and was asleep within minutes. Gideon settled into the chair by the window, rifle across his lap, and watched the darkness gather across the grasslands. Somewhere out there, something had scared Mara Callan badly enough to walk 3 weeks through killing heat with 2 children. Somewhere out there, someone might be looking for them. He told himself it didn't matter. 2 days. Then they'd be gone. But as the stars wheeled overhead and the prairie settled into its nighttime rhythms, Gideon couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. That the moment he'd lifted Mara Callan into his arms, he'd set into motion a chain of events that couldn't be stopped. The heat broke around midnight, a brief storm that brought more lightning than rain, illuminating the grasslands in stark white flashes. Gideon watched it from the window, counting seconds between thunder and lightning, marking how far away the storm traveled. Behind him, Daisy whimpered in her sleep. Immediately, Mara's voice rose in soft murmur, words too quiet to distinguish, but the tone unmistakable. Comfort, love, protection. The little girl settled, and silence reclaimed the room. Gideon's hands tightened on the rifle. 2 days, he reminded himself. Just 2 days. Dawn came pale and hot, the brief storm having done nothing to break the summer's grip. Gideon woke in the chair, neck stiff, rifle still balanced across his knees. The bed was empty. He was on his feet instantly, hand on the rifle, before he heard the voices from the kitchen. "Can't stay here, Luke. We already put him in danger just by being here." "But Ma, you're still sick. Daisy's still sick. We don't have a choice." Gideon appeared in the doorway, and both of them fell silent. Mara stood by the stove, one hand braced against the counter for support, her face pale but determined. Luke sat at the table, looking more child than soldier, in the morning light, worry carved into every line of his young face. Daisy sat on the floor near the stove, playing with wooden spoons, humming tunelessly to herself. Her fever had broken completely. Color returned to normal, though she was still far too thin. "Coffee's on," Mara said quietly, not quite meeting his eyes. "I hope you don't mind. I thought you should be in bed. I've imposed enough." "That's not what I asked." She looked up then, meeting his gaze directly. In the daylight, he could see her more clearly, mid-30s, pretty in a worn-down way, with good bones and eyes that had seen too much. The kind of woman who'd been beautiful before life had sanded it down to something harder and more durable. "I'm well enough to travel," she said firmly. "No, you're not." "Mr. Hale." "Gideon." She stopped, momentarily thrown. "Gideon, you've been more than kind, but we can't stay. It's not safe." "For who?" Her jaw tightened. "For you." Luke looked between them, tension drawing him upright in his chair. Daisy, oblivious, continued her tuneless humming. Gideon poured himself coffee, black and bitter, buying time to choose his words. "Let me tell you what I see," he said finally. "I see a woman who can barely stand, 2 children who need rest and regular food, and I see someone scared enough to risk killing all 3 of you rather than accept help. You don't understand? Then explain it to me." Mara's hands trembled slightly around her own coffee cup. She set it down carefully, as if afraid it might shatter. "There's a man," she said quietly, "Silas Crow. He's powerful, rich, connected, and he's looking for us." "Why?" She was silent for a long moment. Then, "Because my husband stole from him before he died, and Crow thinks I know where the money is hidden." "Do you?" No. The word was flat, final. But he won't believe that. He'll do whatever it takes to make me tell him something I don't know. Gideon studied her face, reading truth in the lines around her eyes and the set of her mouth. Your husband, how'd he die? They said it was an accident. Mara's voice went hollow. Fall from a horse, broke his neck, except Thomas was the best rider in 3 counties, and that horse was gentle as a lamb. Murder. She didn't flinch from the word. Yes. And this Crow? He's the kind of man who'd kill a woman and 2 children to protect his secrets? He's the kind of man who'd enjoy it. The words hung in the air, simple and terrible. Luke's hands had curled into fists on the table. Daisy's humming had stopped, though she still played with the spoons, her attention seemingly focused on her game. But Gideon caught the tension in her small shoulders, the way she didn't look up. The child had learned to make herself small and quiet when adults talked about dangerous things. Gideon set his coffee cup down with deliberate care. 2 days, he said. That was the deal. 2 days for you to rest and recover. After that, you do what you need to do. But those 2 days are mine to give, and I'm giving them. Understood? Mara's eyes searched his face. Why? Because 6 years ago, someone gave me a choice when I didn't deserve one. He stood, moving toward the door. And because no child should have to walk through summer heat until they collapse. He left before she could respond, escaping into the morning heat and the familiar rhythm of chores. But as he worked, his mind kept circling back to the same thought. Silas Crow, a man powerful enough to murder and walk away clean. Rich enough to hire hunters, connected enough that running might never be far enough. And now Gideon had put himself between that man and his prey. Fool, he told himself. Damned fool. But when he walked back to the cabin for midday meal and saw Luke helping his mother to the table, saw Daisy's shy smile when Gideon nodded at her, he couldn't quite regret it. Not yet. The afternoon stretched hot and still. Mara slept, exhaustion and lingering fever claiming her despite her protests. Luke helped with chores, working alongside Gideon with the focused intensity of a boy trying to prove his worth. Daisy stayed in the cabin, 2 weeks still for the heat, her small voice drifting through the windows as she sang to herself. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the grasslands in shades of amber and gold, Gideon stood on his porch and watched the road. Empty still. But somewhere out there, Silas Crow was looking for a woman and 2 children who'd disappeared into the summer heat, and every day they stayed here, every day their trail grew colder, was a day closer to being found. 2 days, Gideon had said. He was beginning to suspect that might be 2 days too long. Inside, Mara woke to the smell of food cooking. She found Gideon at the stove, Luke setting the table with careful precision, Daisy watching from a chair with solemn eyes. You cook, Mara observed, surprise coloring her voice. Man lives alone long enough. He learns, or he starves. Gideon didn't turn from the stove. Hope you like stew. They ate together as the evening light faded, 4 people who'd been strangers that morning sharing a meal in comfortable silence. Luke devoured 3 bowls. Daisy managed 1 before falling asleep with her head on the table. Mara ate slowly, methodically, rebuilding strength bite by bite. Tell me about Crow, Egg, Gideon said when the meal was finished and the children were in bed. Everything. Mara looked up from the coffee he'd poured her, wariness returning to her eyes. Why? Because if he's coming, I'd rather know what I'm facing. You're not facing anything. We'll be gone. Tell me anyway. She studied him for a long moment, then sighed. Silas Crow owns half of Montana. Mines, cattle, timber. If it makes money, he's got his fingers in it. But that's not how he got rich. How'd he do it? By taking what wasn't his. By buying off judges and sheriffs and anyone else who might ask inconvenient questions. By making sure anyone who stood against him disappeared. Her hands wrapped around the coffee cup, seeking warmth despite the summer heat. My husband worked for him once, kept his books, managed his accounts. Thomas was good with numbers, saw patterns other people missed. He found something. Proof. Years of it. Fraudulent deeds, forged documents, murdered rivals. Thomas spent 6 months copying everything, building a case that could take Crow down. Her voice went flat. Then someone told Crow what he was doing. Your husband ran. With everything he'd found, every scrap of evidence that could put Crow in prison for the rest of his life. He hid it somewhere safe, then came for us. She paused. We made it 3 days before they caught up. Gideon waited, silent. They killed Thomas right in front of us. Made it look like an accident, but she stopped, swallowed hard. Luke saw. He knows. We both do. And they didn't kill you. Because Crow wants what Thomas stole. He thinks I know where it's hidden. Thinks he can make me tell. Her eyes rose to meet his. He's wrong. Thomas never told me. Said it was safer that way. If I didn't know, I couldn't tell, even if... She didn't finish. Didn't need to. So you ran. What else could I do? Wait for him to realize I was telling the truth? Watch him hurt my children to make me talk about something I don't know? Her jaw set. No. We ran, and we've been running ever since. Gideon absorbed this, mind working through angles. Evidence like that. Your husband must have hidden it somewhere secure. Bank vault, lawyer's office. Mara shook her head. Thomas didn't trust banks, didn't trust lawyers. He buried it. Where? I don't know. Somewhere on his family's old property, I think. But that land's been sold 3 times since Thomas was a boy. Could be anywhere. And Crow knows this? He knows Thomas had it, knows it's hidden. That's all he needs to keep hunting us. She set the cup down with trembling hands. That's why we have to go, why we can't stay. Because when he finds us, and he will find us eventually, anyone nearby becomes a target. Maybe. She looked up sharply. There's no maybe about it. You don't know what he's capable of. I know men like him. Gideon's voice was quiet, but something in it made her stop. Rich men who think money makes them untouchable. Powerful men who've never been told no. I've known them, worked for them, fought them. Then you understand why I understand that running won't save you. He stood, moved to the window, looking out at the darkening grasslands. Man like Crow? He's got resources. Money to hire trackers, sheriffs in his pocket, connections across 3 territories. You can run for years, and he'll still find you. The only thing that stops men like that is hitting them harder than they expect. With what? Hope and good intentions? Bitterness edged her words. I'm a widow with 2 children and no money. He has an empire. There's no fight here. There's only survival. Gideon turned, met her eyes across the dim room. Your husband built a case against him. Evidence that could put him away. That's a weapon. A weapon I don't have, can't use, don't even know where to find. But Crow doesn't know that. Far as he knows, you could walk into any sheriff's office tomorrow and hand over everything Thomas gathered. Except every sheriff between here and Montana is either bought or scared. There's nowhere to go that Crow's money hasn't reached first. Maybe, Gideon's mouth quirked, not quite a smile. But there are still federal marshals, men who can't be bought because they've got nothing Crow can take away. Mara stared at him. You're talking about fighting back. I'm talking about not dying quiet. The words hung between them, heavy with implication. Outside, cicadas sang their twilight chorus. Inside, 2 children slept, temporarily safe, temporarily at peace. Mara's hands trembled against the table. If I fight him, he'll kill me. Kill my children. If you run, he'll catch you eventually. And when he does, what then? She had no answer for that. Gideon returned to the table, sat across from her. I'm not saying it's not dangerous. I'm saying you're already in danger, and running just delays the inevitable. But if you stand and fight, if you find that evidence and get it to someone who can use it, you might actually survive this. Might, she echoed hollowly. That's not much to stake our lives on. It's more than you had yesterday. She looked at him, really looked at him, seeing past the weathered face and quiet manner to something harder beneath. A man who'd made difficult choices and lived with the consequences. A man who understood that sometimes survival meant standing when every instinct screamed to run. Why do you care? She asked softly. We're nothing to you, strangers who collapsed on your doorstep. You could send us away tomorrow and go back to your quiet life, and no one would blame you. Gideon was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, almost distant. 6 years ago, I did something that got good people killed, trusted the wrong man, made the wrong call, and by the time I realized my mistake, it was too late. His hands rested flat on the table, palms down. I came here to hide from that. Built a life where I'd never have to make another choice that mattered, where I'd never risk anyone but myself. He looked up, met her eyes. But you're here now. And those children sleeping in my bed, they didn't choose this any more than I chose what happened 6 years ago. Difference is, they still have a chance. And I'll be damned if I let them lose it, because I was too much a coward to help. Mara's breath caught. You don't owe us anything. No, he agreed. But maybe I owe myself. Maybe this is my chance to do something right for once. The silence that followed was different. Not uncomfortable, but weighted with possibility. With the fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, there was a way out of this that didn't end in graves and grief. Finally, Mara spoke. Even if I wanted to fight, I wouldn't know where to start. We start by figuring out where your husband hid that evidence. Then we get it to someone who can use it. Gideon's voice was steady, certain. And we do it before Crow's men find this place. They will find us. It's only a matter of time. Then we'd better make the most of what we've got. He stood, moved toward the door. Get some rest. Tomorrow we start planning. Gideon. He paused, hand on the doorframe. Thank you, she said quietly, for not sending us away. For believing there's a way through this. He nodded once, then disappeared into the night. Mara sat alone in the dimming kitchen, listening to her children breathe in the next room, feeling the weight of impossible choices pressing down on her shoulders. But beneath the fear, something else stirred, something she hadn't felt since Thomas died. Hope. Fragile and dangerous, but there nonetheless. Outside, Gideon stood on his porch and watched the stars emerge one by one across the vast Wyoming sky. In the barn, cattle shuffled and settled. On the grasslands, coyotes called to each other in the darkness. And somewhere out there, Silas Crow's men were searching, drawing closer with every passing day. 2 days, Gideon had said. But as he stood there in the summer darkness, he knew the truth. 2 days had never been enough. The moment he'd brought Mara Callan and her children into his home, he'd chosen his side. Now the only question was whether that choice would save them or kill them all. The heat pressed down, relentless even in darkness, and Gideon thought about second chances and the cost of redemption, about children who deserved better, and mothers who'd walk through fire to give it to them. Tomorrow they'd start planning, start fighting back. But tonight, for just a few more hours, they had peace, safety, rest. It would have to be enough. Morning came with the kind of heat that made the air shimmer above the grasslands, distorting distance until the horizon seemed to waver like a mirage. Gideon was already up, had been since before dawn, working through the coolest hours before the sun turned the ranch into an oven. He'd fed the cattle, checked the water troughs, and was mending fence wire when he heard the cabin door open. Luke appeared, barefoot and squinting against the early light, carrying a bucket toward the pump. The boy moved with purpose, shoulders set despite exhaustion still visible in the shadows under his eyes. "Your mother awake?" Gideon called across the yard. Luke nodded, working the pump handle with both hands. "Says she's feeling better. Daisy's fever's gone completely." "Good." Gideon twisted another length of wire, securing it to the post. "You eat yet?" "Waiting for you to come in." "Don't. Growing boy needs food." He glanced up, caught the stubborn set of Luke's jaw. "That's not a request." The boy hesitated, then nodded and headed back inside with the full bucket. Gideon watched him go, recognizing the fierce independence, the determination not to be a burden. He'd been that way once, before the world had taught him that independence was just another word for alone. He finished the fence section and returned to the cabin to find the kitchen transformed. Mara stood at the stove, still moving carefully, but with color back in her face, frying eggs and potatoes with practiced efficiency. Daisy sat at the table, swinging her legs and humming that same tuneless melody from yesterday. Luke was setting out plates, arranging them with precise care. "You should be resting," Gideon said from the doorway. Mara glanced back at him, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. "I've rested enough. And you've done enough for us. The least I can do is cook breakfast." That wasn't part of the deal. Neither was planning to fight a man who has sheriffs and judges in his pocket. She turned back to the stove, flipping eggs with a swift motion. So I figure we're even. Gideon moved to the pump, washed his hands and face, feeling the weight of what they'd discussed last night settling back onto his shoulders. In the harsh light of morning, the idea of taking on Silas Crow seemed even more impossible than it had in darkness. A man with an empire against a widow, 2 children, and a rancher who'd spent 6 years hiding from his own past. But when he looked at Luke's determined face, at Daisy's shy smile, at the way Mara held herself, straight-backed despite fever and exhaustion, he knew there was no walking away from this. Not anymore. They ate together, the silence comfortable now, familiar in a way that should have been impossible after less than 2 days. When the plates were cleared and Daisy was playing quietly in the corner with the wooden spoons, Gideon spread a map across the table. "Your husband's family property," he said without preamble. "Where was it?" Mara studied the map, fingers tracing lines and boundaries. "Here," she tapped a spot in eastern Montana near the Yellowstone River. 300 acres. His grandfather homesteaded it in the 50s, raised cattle and horses. Thomas was born in that house. When was it sold? First time? About 10 years ago, after his father died. Thomas's brother got the land, sold it to pay debts within a year. Then it changed hands twice more. Last I heard, some mining company owned it, looking for copper. Gideon studied the location, measuring distances, calculating travel time. "Weeks' ride from here, maybe less if we push hard. But that assumes your husband buried the evidence somewhere on that land. If he didn't, he did." Luke spoke up from where he'd been listening silently. "I remember. Right before we left, Pa took me riding, just the 2 of us. He showed me a place by the river where the cottonwoods grow thick. Said his grandfather planted them when he first broke ground." Mara looked at her son sharply. "Thomas took you there." "He wanted me to remember it, said someday I might need to find it again." Luke's voice was steady, but his hands trembled slightly. "He made me describe it back to him 3 times. The bend in the river, the lightning-struck tree, the old foundation stones from the original cabin." "Did he tell you why?" Gideon asked. "Not exactly, but he gave me something." Luke reached into his pocket, pulled out a small object wrapped in cloth. He unwrapped it carefully, revealing a brass key, old and tarnished. Said if anything happened to him, I should keep this safe, that someday it might be important. Mara stared at the key as if it were a snake. "You never told me you had that." "Pa said not to tell anyone, not even you." Luke looked apologetic but firm. He said it was safer if only I knew. Gideon took the key, turning it over in his palm. It was old, heavy, the kind used for strong boxes or document chests. "There's a lockbox buried on that property somewhere. Your father showed Luke where. And Crow doesn't know about it." Mara's voice carried equal parts hope and fear. "If we could get there first." "Big if." Gideon set the key on the table between them. "Weeks ride minimum, through territory Crow probably has people watching. Even if we make it, there's no guarantee we can find one buried box on 300 acres. And even if we find it, we'd need to get the evidence to federal marshals without getting killed in the process." "So we're back to running." Mara's shoulders sagged slightly. "No." Luke's voice cut through the defeat. "No more running. Pa died trying to stop Crow. Died so we could have that evidence. I'm not letting it stay buried because we're scared." "Luke." Mara reached for her son. "Ma, I saw what they did to Pa. I saw it." His young voice cracked, but held. "And I've seen you walk until you could barely stand, seen Daisy get so sick she couldn't even cry. We can't keep doing this. We can't keep running until we drop dead somewhere, and Crow wins anyway." Silence filled the kitchen. Daisy had stopped playing, her small face solemn and watchful. Mara's eyes shone with unshed tears, but she didn't look away from her son. "He's right," Gideon said quietly. "Running just delays the inevitable. If you're going to survive this, you need to turn and fight. Question is how." Mara drew a shaky breath. "Even if we could get the evidence, who would we take it to? Crow's bought every lawman between here and Canada. Not federal marshals. They answer to Washington, not local money." Gideon traced a line on the map. "There's a marshal's office in Cheyenne. Man named Frank Brennan runs it. I knew him years back, honest as they come, stubborn as bedrock. If anyone would take on a case against Crow, it'd be him. And you trust him? Gideon paused, then nodded slowly. With my life, which is what we'd be doing if we go this route. Luke leaned forward. So we go to Montana, find the box, bring it back to Cheyenne. Simple. Nothing about this is simple. But despite the words, Gideon was already planning routes, calculating risks. We'd need to move fast, stay off main roads, avoid towns where Crow might have eyes. Travel at night when possible. Keep the children hidden during day stops. I can ride, Luke said immediately. Been riding since I was 4. And Daisy? Gideon looked at the little girl, small and fragile despite her recovered health. I'll carry her. Mara's voice was firm. Whatever it takes. If there's even a chance this could work. A sound stopped her mid-sentence. Hoofbeats. Multiple riders, approaching fast. Gideon was moving before conscious thought, grabbing his rifle from beside the door, moving to the window. Get the children in the root cellar. Now! Mara didn't argue, just scooped Daisy up and grabbed Luke's arm, moving toward the trapdoor in the floor of the pantry. Luke started to protest, but his mother's look silenced him. Within seconds, they disappeared below, the door settling back into place with barely a whisper. Gideon watched through the window as 3 riders came into view, slowing as they approached the ranch. Not law. Their clothes were too fine, their horses too expensive for county deputies. They wore dust like they'd been riding hard, but their gun belts were oiled leather, their weapons well-maintained. Professional men. The kind who got paid to ask questions and make sure they got answers. The lead rider was tall, angular, with a face like carved granite and eyes that missed nothing. He reined in 20 feet from the porch, his companions flanking him in a practiced formation that spoke of military training or worse. Morning, the man called out, voice pleasant enough but with an edge underneath. You Gideon Hale? I am. Gideon stepped onto the porch, rifle held casually but ready. Something I can do for you, gentlemen? Name's Carson. We're looking for someone. Woman, 2 children. Might have passed through this way a few days back. Carson's smile didn't reach his eyes. Wondering if you've seen them. I see a lot of people. This is open country. This woman would have been on foot, sick probably. Boy about 10, little girl, maybe 4 or 5. Carson leaned forward in his saddle. They're wanted for theft. Family matter, you understand. Just trying to help them get home safe. Haven't seen anyone matching that description. The lie came smooth, practiced. But like I said, open country. Lots of travelers. One of Carson's men shifted slightly, hand drifting toward his gun. Carson raised a hand, stopping him. Mind if we look around, just to be sure? Wouldn't want to miss them if they happened to take shelter here without you knowing. I'd mind. Gideon's voice stayed level. This is private property. You've got no warrant, no badge, no authority to search anything. Now, Mr. Hale, there's no need to be difficult. Carson's pleasantness was wearing thin. We're just trying to find a woman and her children, return some stolen property, nothing that concerns you. Then you won't mind leaving when I ask you to. The 2 men stared at each other across the dusty yard, tension thickening the air like the heat. Carson's hand rested on his saddle horn, close to the pistol holstered at his hip. His companions had spread out slightly, positioning themselves for clear shots if it came to that. Gideon remained still, rifle barrel angled just enough to be ready, not quite enough to be threatening. Yet. You're making a mistake, Carson said quietly. Mr. Crow doesn't like people who interfere in his business. There it was. The confirmation Gideon hadn't wanted but had expected. Don't know any Mr. Crow, don't care about his business. All I know is 3 armed men just rode onto my land making demands they've got no right to make. He raised the rifle slightly. Now I'm going to ask you once more, politely, to leave. After that, we're going to have a different kind of conversation. Carson's jaw tightened. For a long moment, Gideon thought it would go sideways, that these men would draw and damn the consequences. But Carson was smarter than that. 3 against 1 might favor the 3, but not before at least one of them caught a bullet. And Gideon's stance said he knew exactly which one would be first. This isn't over, Carson said finally. Seems like it is to me. Carson wheeled his horse, his men following suit, But before they rode off, he turned back. You're protecting them. You're as guilty as they are. Mr. Crow has a long reach and a longer memory. Think about that next time you decide to play hero. They galloped off, raising dust that hung in the still air, long after they'd disappeared. Gideon waited until the sound of hoofbeats faded completely, then waited 5 minutes more before calling out. They're gone. The trapdoor lifted and Mara emerged, Daisy clutched tight against her chest, Luke right behind. The boy's face was pale but set, his hand gripping something Gideon couldn't see. You heard? Gideon asked. Every word. Mara's voice shook slightly. Crow's men. They found us. Found the general area maybe, but they're not sure. If they were, Carson would have pushed harder. Gideon set the rifle aside, mind working through implications. Still, now they know someone's helping you. They'll be back, probably with more men. Then we have to leave, now, before what? You walk back out into that heat with your children, get maybe 10 miles before they spot you. Gideon shook his head. That's not a plan. That's suicide. Staying here is suicide for you. Mara set Daisy down gently. You heard what he said. Crow will come after you now, too. Let him. The words surprised Gideon even as he said them. I've spent 6 years hiding from choices I made. Maybe it's time I stopped. Luke had moved to the window, watching the road with the intensity of a sentry. They'll come back tonight, or tomorrow, with more men. Probably, Gideon agreed. Then we don't have a week to get to Montana. We have hours. The boy turned, and Gideon saw something fierce burning in his young eyes. We leave now. Travel hard. Stay ahead of them. It's our only chance. Mara looked between her son and Gideon, fear and determination warring on her face. It's too dangerous. With the children, Ma. Luke's voice was gentle but firm. It's already dangerous. Staying or going, we're in danger. But if we go, if we get that evidence, maybe we can end this. Maybe we can stop running forever. Daisy, silent until now, spoke up in her small voice. I can be brave. Like Luke. The words hit Mara like a physical blow. She closed her eyes, and Gideon saw the moment the decision crystallized. When she opened them again, the fear was still there, but it was buried beneath something harder. How long would we need to get ready? Hour, maybe 2. Gideon was already calculating supplies, routes, necessities. I've got horses enough for all of us, provisions for a week if we're careful. We travel light, move fast, stick to back trails. And when Crow's men catch up, we make sure they don't. He met her eyes steadily. I won't lie to you, Mara. This is dangerous. Maybe the most dangerous thing any of us will ever do. But your son's right. It's the only way this ends that doesn't involve graves. She nodded slowly. Then we do it. We ride for Montana, find what Thomas hid, and bring it back to your marshal friend in Cheyenne. Our marshal friend, Gideon corrected quietly. We're in this together now. The next 2 hours passed in controlled chaos. Gideon pulled out saddles and tack, checked horses, loaded saddlebags with jerky, hardtack, coffee, ammunition. Mara gathered clothes for the children, filled canteens, made sure Daisy understood they were going on a long ride, but it would be an adventure. Luke helped everywhere, soaking up information like a sponge. How to check cinches, how to distribute weight in saddlebags, which trails to take and which to avoid. The boy was learning to survive, and Gideon recognized the grim necessity driving it. By noon, 4 horses stood ready in the yard. Gideon had chosen carefully, steady animals with endurance, used to rough country and long days. He'd given Mara his gentlest mare, Luke a sturdy gelding that wouldn't spook easy, and Daisy would ride with her mother, at least until they were sure she could handle her own mount. They were loading the last of the supplies when Gideon paused, looking back at the cabin. 6 years he'd lived here. 6 years of quiet and isolation and carefully maintained distance from anything that mattered. Second thoughts? Mara asked quietly. Just saying goodbye. He turned away from the cabin toward the waiting horses. Place was never really home anyway, just somewhere to hide. And now? Now I'm done hiding. They mounted up as the sun reached its peak, heat shimmering off the grasslands in waves. Gideon took the lead, Mara and Daisy behind him, Luke bringing up the rear like a small but determined rear guard. They headed northeast, away from the main roads, following trails that deer and cattle used, paths that wouldn't show up on any map. The first hours passed in tense silence, everyone listening for sounds of pursuit, but the prairie stretched empty around them, just wind and grass and the endless sky. Daisy dozed against her mother's chest. Luke rode with the straight-back determination of someone refusing to show weakness. As evening approached, Gideon led them into a stand of cottonwoods near a creek bed. The water was low but running clear, and he called a halt. "We'll rest here a few hours, let the horses drink and graze, then we ride through the night." "Won't that be dangerous?" Mara asked, sliding down from her horse with Daisy in her arms. "The horses could stumble, break a leg." "Not as dangerous as being caught in daylight." He started unsaddling his mount with efficient movements. "Moon's near full tonight. We'll have enough light." Luke helped with the horses, copying Gideon's movements, learning by watching. Mara settled Daisy in the shade and began unpacking food for a cold meal. No fires, nothing that might give away their position. They ate quickly, speaking in low voices, as the light began to fade from gold to amber to deep purple. Daisy asked questions in whispered excitement about riding under the stars. Luke studied the map Gideon had brought, tracing the route they'd take, memorizing landmarks. Mara sat slightly apart, staring back the way they'd come. Fear and hope mingled on her face. Gideon settled beside her. "Having doubts?" "Constant ones." She didn't look at him. "But doubt doesn't change what needs doing." "Your husband, Thomas. Tell me about him." She was quiet for so long he thought she wouldn't answer. Then, "He was good. Genuinely good. Not just in the church-going, proper-talking way. He saw something wrong. He tried to fix it. Saw someone hurting. He helped. That's why he went after Crow. Not for revenge or money, but because Crow was hurting people and getting away with it. That kind of good gets people killed." "I know." Her voice broke slightly. "I told him to let it go. Told him we could leave, start over somewhere Crow's reach didn't extend. But he said running just meant Crow would hurt someone else. That sometimes you have to stand even when standing means falling." Sounds like a man worth remembering. "He was." She looked at Gideon finally. "You remind me of him sometimes, that stubbornness, that refusal to look away from hard things. I looked away for 6 years. But you stopped. That's what matters." She smiled faintly. "Thomas would have liked you, would have appreciated a man willing to help strangers at cost to himself." "Haven't paid any cost yet." "You lost your home, your safety, your peace." She gestured to the darkening prairie. "And now you're riding into danger for people you barely know. I'd say that's cost enough." Gideon had no answer for that, so he simply nodded and stood. "We should move. Full dark in an hour, and I want distance behind us before we rest again." They rode through the night, following game trails and creek beds, staying in low ground where possible, avoiding ridge lines that would silhouette them against the sky. The moon rose huge and bright, turning the grassland silver, providing enough light to pick their way forward safely. Daisy slept against her mother's chest. Luke fought exhaustion, swaying in his saddle but refusing to complain. Mara rode in silence, one arm around her daughter, the other steady on the reins. And Gideon led them deeper into territory he hadn't traveled in years, toward a confrontation he couldn't predict, carrying the fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, doing the right thing wouldn't end in blood and grief this time. By dawn, they'd covered 30 miles, and Gideon called another halt in a hollow, surrounded by scrub pine. They made cold camp again, taking turns sleeping while someone kept watch. The horses grazed on tough prairie grass, and the wind whispered through the pines like secrets. Luke took first watch, insisting despite his exhaustion. Gideon didn't argue. The boy needed to feel useful, needed to contribute. So he settled against a tree trunk and watched the kid scan the horizon with fierce attention, rifle held ready, young face set in determined lines. "You were a soldier," Luke said after a while. "What makes you say that?" "The way you move, the way you check your weapons. My pa had a friend who'd been in the war. He moved the same way. Like he was always ready for things to go wrong." Gideon was quiet for a moment. "Yeah, I was a soldier, long time ago." "Is that how you learned to fight? Learn to survive?" Not quite the same thing. He closed his eyes, not sleeping, but resting. Fighting's easy, surviving the fight, and what comes after, that's the hard part. Luke absorbed this. Are we going to survive this? Planning on it, but you don't know for sure. No, Gideon admitted. I don't, but I know running blind didn't work, and hiding didn't work, so fighting's the last option. Sometimes that's all you get, one last option and the will to see it through. I'm scared, Luke whispered. Good. Scared keeps you sharp. It's when you stop being scared that you get careless. Gideon opened his eyes, looked at the boy. But don't let fear make your choices. Your pa didn't. He was probably terrified every day after he stole that evidence, knowing Crow would come for him. But he did it anyway because it was right. And he died. Yeah, he did. Gideon didn't soften it. But he died standing for something. Died protecting people he'd never meet from a man who needed stopping. That's not a small thing, Luke. That's the kind of death that means something. The boy nodded slowly, blinking back tears. I want it to mean something. I don't want him to have died for nothing. Then we make sure he didn't. We get that evidence, we bring Crow down, and we show your pa that his sacrifice mattered. Gideon's voice was firm. That's the promise. That's what we're riding toward. They sat in comfortable silence after that, watching the sun climb higher, feeling the heat build again. Around them, the prairie woke slowly, birds calling, insects buzzing, the world continuing its rhythms regardless of human drama. When Mara woke and took over watch, Gideon finally slept, dropping into the light, ready sleep of someone who'd learned to rest anywhere but wake instantly at threat. Luke curled up near his mother and was asleep within minutes, exhaustion finally claiming him. Daisy woke last, bright-eyed and chattering quietly to herself, playing with pebbles and twigs, while her mother kept watch. The little girl seemed remarkably unbothered by their situation, seeing it all as an adventure rather than a flight for their lives. Gideon wasn't sure if that was childhood resilience or if she simply didn't understand the danger yet. They rested through the hottest part of the day, then rode again as evening approached, covering another 25 miles before full dark. 3 days at this pace would get them to the Montana border, another 2 to the old homestead property, if they made it that far. If Crow's men didn't catch them first. If the evidence was actually where Thomas had hidden it. If they could get it to Cheyenne without being killed. A lot of ifs. But Gideon had learned long ago that certainty was a luxury afforded only to the dead. The living had to work with possibilities and prayer, pushing forward because stopping meant surrender. The second night passed like the first. Slow miles through darkness, rest in hidden hollows, constant vigilance for signs of pursuit. By the third day, they crossed into Montana territory, and Gideon felt the landscape shift subtly. The grass grew taller here, the creeks ran deeper, and the mountains loomed larger on the western horizon. They were getting close. That evening, as they made camp in a box canyon with good sight lines and only one entrance, Mara finally voiced the question they'd all been thinking. What if we find the evidence and it's not enough? What if Crow's bought so many people that even federal marshals can't touch him? Gideon considered this while checking his rifle for the third time that day. Then at least we tried. At least your children will know their father didn't die for nothing, and you didn't spend your life running without purpose. That's not very reassuring. Wasn't trying to reassure you. Was trying to be honest. He looked up, met her eyes. We're past the point of reassurance, Mara. We're in the territory of action and consequence now. All we can do is move forward and handle what comes. Luke, sitting nearby and cleaning their meager cooking supplies, spoke up. My pa used to say that courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about being afraid and doing the right thing anyway. Smart man, your father. Gideon stood, stretched muscles sore from days in the saddle. Get some sleep, all of you. We reach the homestead tomorrow. After that, things get complicated fast. But sleep didn't come easy that night. Everyone felt it. The weight of proximity, the knowledge that tomorrow would bring them to a crossroads. Find the evidence or don't. Live or die. Win or lose. Daisy whimpered in her sleep, and Mara held her close, humming that same tuneless melody until the little girl settled. Luke lay awake staring at the stars, clearly thinking about his father, about buried secrets and the cost of justice. And Gideon sat watch, rifle across his knees, thinking about choices and consequences, about the 6 years he'd wasted hiding and the days ahead that would determine whether redemption was possible or just another word for dying with purpose. The wind shifted, bringing the scent of pine and distant rain. Somewhere out there, Silas Crow's men were searching, drawing closer with every passing hour. And somewhere ahead, buried in earth that had changed hands 3 times, lay evidence that might save them all or get them killed trying. Tomorrow, they'd find out which. Dawn broke cold and gray over the Montana grasslands, the kind of morning that promised heat later but started with a chill that sank into bones and wouldn't shake loose. Gideon woke to find Luke already up, standing at the canyon entrance with the brass key clutched in his hand, staring east toward land that had once belonged to his grandfather. "Couldn't sleep?" Gideon asked quietly, not wanting to wake Mara and Daisy. Luke shook his head. "Kept thinking about Pa, about the last time I saw him alive." His voice was steady, but his knuckles were white around the key. "He told me to be strong, to take care of Ma and Daisy no matter what. I didn't understand then that he was saying goodbye." Gideon settled beside the boy, looking out at the landscape that was slowly revealing itself in the growing light. "You've done what he asked, kept them safe, kept moving, didn't give up even when giving up would have been easier. But I didn't stop them from killing him. You were 9 years old, Luke. There was nothing you could have done. I could have warned him, could have—" The boy's voice broke. "I saw one of Crow's men watching our house 2 days before it happened. Saw him, and didn't say anything because I thought I was imagining things. If I'd told Pa, maybe he would have run sooner, maybe Crow's men would have killed all of you instead of just your father." Gideon's voice was firm, but not unkind. "Maybe they would have tortured your mother to find what they wanted. Maybe a lot of things. But blaming yourself for not preventing something you had no power to stop, that's a weight you don't need to carry." Luke looked up at him, eyes red-rimmed. "How do you know?" "Because I carried it for 6 years, still carry it some days." Gideon stood, offering his hand to pull the boy up. "But I'm learning that the only way forward is to do what's right now, in this moment, instead of dying slow from what went wrong before." They stood together in the gray light, man and boy, both carrying grief too heavy for their frames, both refusing to let it break them. Behind them, Mara stirred and Daisy's small voice rose in a sleepy question. The day was beginning whether they were ready or not. By the time full light painted the grasslands gold, they'd broken camp and were riding east. Luke led now, following memories that were 3 years old but apparently clear as yesterday. He pointed out landmarks as they appeared. A distinctive rock formation, a creek that bent back on itself twice, a stand of cottonwoods that his grandfather had planted in a perfect line like soldiers. "It's changed," Luke said as they crested a ridge and looked down at what had been the Callan homestead. "There's new buildings, and the old house is gone." Gideon studied the valley below. Where there had once been a simple ranch, there was now a mining operation. Rough buildings, equipment, men moving with purpose between structures. Smoke rose from what looked like an assay office. Horses were corralled near a large barn. At least a dozen men worked the site, maybe more. "Mining company," Mara said quietly. "That's who bought it last. They must be working the land for copper. Makes our job harder." Gideon counted men, assessed weapons. Most of the workers looked like honest laborers, but he spotted at least 3 who carried themselves different. Gun belts worn low, eyes that scanned instead of focusing on work. Guards or hired guns. Can't just ride in and start digging without drawing attention. Luke pointed to the river visible beyond the mining camp. "The cottonwoods Pa showed me are that way, past the buildings, down by the water. We might be able to circle around, come in from the riverside without being seen." "In daylight? With Daisy?" Mara shook her head. "It's too risky." "Everything's risky at this point," Gideon said. "Question is which risk gives us the best chance. Luke, those cottonwoods. How close are they to the camp?" "Quarter mile, maybe. There's thick brush between the trees and the buildings. We used to play hide and seek there when I was little. You could lose yourself in it easy." Gideon considered. "We wait until afternoon when the heat's worst. Workers will be slower, less attentive. We leave the horses hidden and go in on foot. Luke shows us where to dig, we get the box, and we're gone before anyone knows we were there." "And if someone sees us?" Mara asked. Then we run. But with luck and timing, no one will. He turned his horse. Come on. We need to find a place to wait where we can watch the camp, learn their patterns. They spent the morning in a shallow ravine half a mile from the mining operation, taking turns watching through Gideon's field glasses. The work followed a predictable rhythm, men emerging from rough bunkhouses at dawn, working through the morning, breaking for a meal around noon, then sluggish in the afternoon heat before a second wind in the evening. The 3 men Gideon had identified as guards made rounds, but without much enthusiasm. This was clearly a quiet assignment, watching equipment and claims in territory where theft wasn't a major concern. They looked bored, complacent. That would work in their favor. There, Luke said around midday, pointing through the glasses. See that lightning-struck tree? The one that's half dead but still standing. That's the marker. The cottonwoods my grandfather planted are just beyond it, right where the river bends. Gideon took the glasses, studied the area. The cottonwoods were exactly where Luke said, a line of mature trees standing distinct from the natural scrub. Between them and the camp was dense brush and tall grass. Plenty of cover for anyone moving carefully. How far from the trees did your father bury the box? He didn't say exactly, just showed me the spot, where 3 of the cottonwoods make a triangle, and there's old foundation stones from the original cabin inside it. He said his grandfather had built on that spot because it was the highest ground near the river, wouldn't flood even in spring runoff. Foundation stones we can work with, something solid to reference. Gideon lowered the glasses. All right. We move at 2 o'clock when the sun's highest and the heat's worst. Mara, you stay here with Daisy? No. Her voice was flat, final. I'm not sitting here waiting while you risk your lives for evidence my husband died protecting. I'm going. Maris, I'm going, Gideon. You'll need someone to keep watch while you dig. And if something goes wrong, if Crow's men show up, you'll need every gun you can get. She met his eyes. Besides, Thomas died for this. I need to be there when we find what he left behind. Gideon wanted to argue, but he recognized the steel in her voice. She'd been running and hiding for months, watching her husband murdered, nearly dying herself in the summer heat. She needed this, needed to be part of the solution instead of just the problem being solved. Fine, but Daisy stays hidden, and if shooting starts, you get back to her no matter what. Agreed? Agreed. They spent the next hours preparing. Gideon checked weapons, made sure everyone understood the plan. Luke practiced moving quiet, learning to place his feet careful to avoid snapping twigs or rustling grass. Mara held Daisy close, explaining in simple terms that Mama and Luke were going to find something Papa had hidden, and she needed to be very brave and very quiet until they came back. Can I come? Daisy asked in her small voice. Not this time, sweet girl. But when we get back, I'll tell you all about it. Mara kissed her daughter's forehead. You're going to stay right here in this safe spot, and Mr. Gideon's going to make sure nothing bad happens. Can you do that for me? Daisy nodded solemnly. I'll be brave like Luke. That's my girl. At 2 o'clock, with the sun hammering down and heat shimmering off the grasslands, 3 figures slipped out of the ravine and began working their way toward the river. Gideon led, moving with the practiced silence of someone who'd done this before. Luke followed, surprisingly quiet for a 10-year-old. Mara brought up the rear, rifle in hand, eyes scanning constantly. They used every scrap of cover, gullies, brush, tall grass, staying low and moving slow. It took 40 minutes to cover what would have been a 10-minute walk in the open, but they reached the edge of the cottonwood grove without raising alarm. Up close, the trees were massive, their trunks thick as barrels, their canopy providing blessed shade from the brutal sun. Luke moved among them with growing confidence, touching bark like greeting old friends, until he stopped in the center of a triangle formed by 3 of the largest trees. Here. His voice was barely a whisper. The foundation stones should be right here. Gideon knelt, brushing away grass and soil, and his fingers struck something solid. Stone, weathered and old, laid in a rough rectangle that marked where walls had once stood. He worked faster, clearing more area, until the outline of the original cabin's foundation emerged. Where would he have buried it? Mara asked, crouched nearby with her rifle ready. Somewhere inside the foundation, somewhere that wouldn't shift or wash away. Gideon studied the stones, looking for disturbance, for any sign that ground had been dug and refilled. "Luke, your father show you exactly where." The boy closed his eyes, clearly visualizing. "He stood right here, in the corner where two walls met, the northeast corner. Said this was where his grandfather kept his valuables, under the hearthstone." Gideon moved to the northeast corner, found a large flat stone slightly different from the others. Hearthstone. Had to be. He wedged his knife under the edge, pried carefully. The stone resisted, then shifted with a grating sound that seemed impossibly loud in the quiet afternoon. Beneath it, the earth was darker, disturbed more recently than the surrounding soil. "This is it," he glanced at Mara. "Keep watch. Luke, help me dig." They worked with hands and knife, scooping soil aside, going down a foot, then two. The ground was packed hard and sweat poured down Gideon's face despite the shade. Luke dug with fierce determination, his small hands moving as fast as Gideon's larger ones. 3 feet down, Luke's fingers struck metal. "I found it!" The boy's whisper was electric with excitement. "I found Pa's box!" Together they cleared the soil away, revealing a metal strongbox about the size of a bread loaf, its surface rusted but intact. A heavy lock secured the lid, the lock that matched the brass key Luke had carried for 3 years. Luke pulled out the key with shaking hands, fitted it to the lock. For a heart-stopping moment, Gideon thought it wouldn't turn, that rust or time had frozen the mechanism. Then it clicked, and the lock popped open. Inside the box, wrapped in oilcloth to protect against moisture, were documents, dozens of them. Deeds with signatures that didn't match, account ledgers showing payments to sheriffs and judges, witness statements from men who'd later disappeared, survey maps with claims marked that didn't align with legal filings. And at the bottom, a thick journal in Thomas Callan's careful handwriting documenting everything he'd found, every crime, every victim, every piece of evidence that proved Silas Crow had built an empire on fraud, theft, and murder. "Sweet mercy," Mara breathed, looking at the contents. "Thomas really did it. He built a case that could—" A rifle shot cracked across the distance, and bark exploded from the tree beside Gideon's head. "Down!" He shoved Luke and Mara flat, scanning for the shooter. Movement near the mining camp, 3 men running their direction, weapons drawn. The guards. They'd been spotted. "Go!" Gideon grabbed the strongbox, thrust it at Luke. "Get to the horses! Now!" They ran, abandoning stealth for speed, crashing through brush with bullets snapping through leaves around them. Behind them, shouts rose as more men joined the chase. Gideon fired twice over his shoulder without aiming, just buying seconds, giving Luke and Mara time to get clear. They burst from the brush into open grassland, and Gideon saw the ravine ahead, saw Daisy's small face peeking over the edge, before Mara screamed at her to get down. 50 yards. They could make it. More shots. One plucked at Gideon's sleeve. Another kicked up dirt at his feet. Luke stumbled, and Gideon grabbed his shirt, hauling him forward. Mara was running flat out, rifle in one hand, the other reaching for her daughter. 20 yards. 10. They tumbled into the ravine in a sliding heap of dust and desperation. Gideon came up on one knee, rifle ready, and put 3 shots into the grass where their pursuers had to cross. One man went down screaming. The other scattered, seeking cover. "Horses! Move!" He fired twice more, then turned and ran for where they'd left the mounts hidden. Mara had Daisy, was already swinging into the saddle with her daughter clutched tight. Luke vaulted onto his gelding with the strongbox strapped across his back. Gideon hit his saddle as bullets started finding their range again, one creasing his horse's flank and making the animal scream and bolt. He let it run, gave it its head, and the other horses followed. They thundered out of the ravine at a dead gallop, hooves pounding, riders bent low, with angry shouts and gunfire pursuing. A mile disappeared beneath them before Gideon dared look back. He saw riders emerging from the mining camp, saw them mounting up, saw the pursuit beginning in earnest. "They're coming!" Luke shouted over the thunder of hooves. "Let them come, just ride!" Gideon angled toward broken country, toward rocks and gullies where horses would have to slow. His mount was blowing hard, showing the effects of days of travel, but fear and pain drove it forward. They rode for 2 hours straight, the horses near collapse, before Gideon found what he'd been seeking. A slot canyon with walls too narrow for easy pursuit and a back exit that wasn't visible from the entrance. He led them in, dismounting quickly. "We can't stay here," Mara gasped, sliding down with Daisy. "They'll find us." "Not right away. And the horses need rest or they'll die under us." Gideon checked his mount's flank where the bullet had creased it. Not deep, but bleeding. He grabbed cloth from his saddlebag, bound it tight. Luke was already opening the strongbox again, staring at the documents inside like they held the secrets of creation. "We got it. We actually got it." "We got it," Gideon confirmed. "Now we need to keep it long enough to use it." "How many were chasing us?" Mara asked. 6, maybe 7. Could be more by now if they sent runners back for help. He reloaded his rifle with quick, practiced movements. Mining company will be sending word to whoever owns the claim. If that's Crow or one of his associates, we'll have a lot more than 7 men hunting us soon. Then we can't go back the way we came. They'll be watching those trails. Luke studied the map they'd brought, his young face serious. "We need another route to Cheyenne." Gideon took the map, traced possible paths. "South takes us through open country, nowhere to hide. West puts us in the mountains, slow going with the horses tired. East is back toward Crow's territory." "So we go north," Luke said. "Circle wide, come down on Cheyenne from a direction they won't expect. North's harder country, less water, fewer settlements." But even as Gideon said it, he was seeing the logic. Also means fewer places for Crow's men to get word, fewer people to bribe for information. And more places to disappear if we need to. Luke looked up. "Pa always said when everyone expects you to zig, you zag. They'll think we're running straight for Cheyenne, so we don't." Mara looked between them, exhaustion and fear warring with hope. "How long would the northern route take?" "Week, maybe more. Depends on how hard they push us." Gideon folded the map. "But the boy's right. Straight to Cheyenne, we're predictable. They'll set up ahead of us, box us in. But if we go north, take our time, stay smart. We might just make it." A sound from the canyon entrance froze them all. Hoofbeats. Multiple riders, moving fast. Gideon moved to the entrance, peered carefully around rock. 7 riders in the distance, spread out, searching. They hadn't found the slot canyon yet, but they were getting close. He pulled back, silent. Mara had her hand over Daisy's mouth, the little girl's eyes huge. Luke gripped the strongbox like a lifeline. The hoofbeats grew louder, closer. Gideon raised his rifle, sighting on the canyon entrance. If they were found, he'd take as many as he could before they went down. Give Mara and the children a chance to run. The riders passed within 100 feet of the entrance, kept going. The sound faded slowly into the distance, and Gideon released a breath he hadn't known he was holding. Beside him, Mara sagged against the canyon wall, and Luke's knuckles were white around the metal box. "That was too close," Mara whispered. "It's going to keep being too close until we reach Cheyenne and get that evidence to Marshal Brennan." Gideon lowered his rifle. "But we bought ourselves some time. They've passed us by, and by the time they realize their mistake, we'll be gone." They waited another hour as the sun began its descent, letting the horses rest and water from canteens. Daisy dozed fitfully, and Mara held her close, humming that tuneless melody that seemed to calm them both. Luke pored over the documents from the strongbox, his young face growing harder with each page. "There's so much," the boy said quietly. "Names of people Crow killed, families he destroyed, all written down in Pa's handwriting." He looked up, tears tracking through the dust on his face. Pa knew. He knew Crow would probably kill him for this, and he wrote it all down anyway. "Because some things are worth dying for," Gideon said. "Your father understood that." "Do you?" "I'm starting to." Gideon stood, checked the horses again. "Time to move. We've got maybe 2 hours before full dark. Let's use them." They rode out of the slot canyon as the sky painted itself in shades of copper and gold, heading north into country that grew progressively rougher. The grasslands gave way to broken terrain, rocky hills, and steep-sided coulees that would slow pursuit but also slow them. As darkness fell, they found a defensible position in a circle of boulders and made cold camp again. No fire, no conversation beyond whispers. Everyone understood they were being hunted now, that Crow's men wouldn't stop until they either caught them or lost the trail completely. Gideon took first watch, sitting in darkness with his rifle and his thoughts. They had what they came for: evidence that could bring down Silas Crow, end his reign of fear and fraud. But they also had every hired gun between Montana and Wyoming hunting them, with more joining the search every hour. The odds weren't good, probably weren't even survivable. But then, Gideon had survived things he shouldn't have before. And the three people sleeping in those boulders, exhausted, scared, but refusing to quit, they deserved the same chance he'd been given 6 years ago. The chance to survive their worst day and find out what came after. Movement caught his eye. Luke, unable to sleep, settling beside him in the darkness. "Can't stop thinking about it," the boy whispered. "We're so close now, to ending this, to making what happened to Pa mean something. It already means something. Your father stood against evil when he could have looked away. That's not a small thing. But if we don't make it to Cheyenne, if Crow's men catch us, then we fight. And if we fall, someone else will find that evidence eventually. Your father documented everything too carefully for it to stay buried forever." Gideon rested a hand on the boy's shoulder. "But we're not planning to fall. We're planning to win." Luke was quiet for a moment. "You really think we can?" "I think we've made it this far when we shouldn't have. Survived what should have killed us. Found what was supposed to stay hidden." Gideon looked up at the stars wheeling overhead. "Seems to me that's the universe saying we've got unfinished business. And I don't plan on disappointing it." A small smile touched Luke's face. "Pa would have liked you, would have said you were stubborn as spring mud." "Your mother said something similar." "Yeah, well, she's right." The smile faded. "Thank you for helping us, for not sending us away when you could have." "Nothing to thank me for. I'm just doing what should have been done from the start, standing between a bully and the people he's trying to hurt." They sat together in companionable silence, man and boy, watching the darkness for threats that might or might not come. Behind them, Mara stirred, checked on Daisy, then settled back into watchful rest. The night stretched long and quiet, and the wind carried the scent of sage and distant rain. Somewhere out there, men with guns and orders were searching. But in this moment, in this circle of stones under these stars, 4 people who'd been strangers a week ago had become something more, a family worth fighting for, a cause worth the risk. And tomorrow, they'd ride north again, deeper into hard country, closer to either salvation or slaughter. But tonight, they had each other and the fierce, fragile hope that sometimes, just sometimes, doing the right thing didn't end in graves, that sometimes courage was enough, that sometimes the good guys won. The hope lasted until dawn, when Luke spotted the dust cloud on the southern horizon. "Riders?" the boy said quietly, field glasses pressed to his face. "At least a dozen, coming fast." Gideon took the glasses, confirmed what he already knew in his gut. Too many horses moving too deliberately to be anything but pursuit. They'd picked up the trail somehow, or gotten lucky, or bought information from someone who'd seen 4 riders heading north. Didn't matter how. They were coming. "How long?" Mara asked, already moving to wake Daisy. 2 hours, maybe 3 if the ground slows them. Gideon lowered the glasses, mind calculating distances, terrain, possibilities. "We can't outrun them. Horses are too tired and they've got fresh mounts." "Then we fight." Luke's voice was steady, despite the fear in his eyes. 12 against 4? That's not a fight. That's a slaughter." Gideon turned, scanning the landscape. Rocky hills to the west, a creek bed running north, and to the east. He stopped, focusing on a formation that might work. "There, see that old homestead? Burned out looks like, but the walls are still standing." Mara squinted at the ruins maybe half a mile distant. "That's where you want to make a stand?" "That's where we buy time." He was already moving toward the horses. "We get inside those walls. We've got cover and high ground. Force them to come at us across open ground if they want the evidence." "And when they do?" "We make them pay for every foot." Gideon swung into the saddle, saw the fear in Mara's face, but also the steel beneath it. She'd walked through hell already. A gunfight was just the next step. "Could be Marshal Brennan sends help. If word reaches him, we're in trouble. And if it doesn't? Then we hold as long as we can and hope the children get clear." He looked at Luke. "You still remember how to find Cheyenne from here?" The boy nodded, understanding what Gideon wasn't saying. If the adults fell, Luke would have to take Daisy and run, would have to deliver that evidence alone. "I won't leave you," Luke said. "You will if your mother and I tell you to, because that box you're carrying is worth more than any of our lives." Gideon's voice was firm. "Your father died for it. We're not letting that death be meaningless. Understood?" Luke's jaw set mutinously, but he nodded. They rode hard for the ruined homestead, the horses summoning reserves they probably didn't have, driven by the urgency in their riders' voices. The dust cloud behind them grew larger, more distinct. Gideon could make out individual riders now, see the sun glinting off weapons. They reached the ruins with maybe 30 minutes to spare. The homestead had been substantial once, two-story stone structure with thick walls and narrow windows perfect for defense. Fire had gutted the interior and collapsed the roof, but the walls stood solid, and the position commanded a clear view of the surrounding grassland for 200 yards in every direction. "Inside," Gideon ordered, already dismounting. "Mara, take the horses around back, get them under cover. Luke, check the structure, make sure it's stable. I need to know if we've got a back way out if this goes wrong." They moved with practiced efficiency born from days of running together. Mara led the horses to the rear of the building where the remains of a barn offered partial shelter. Luke scrambled through the ruins, testing walls, checking sight lines. Gideon positioned himself at a window facing south, tracking the approaching riders. "Structure's solid," Luke reported, breathing hard. "Fire didn't touch the foundation, and the walls are good stone. There's a root cellar in back we can use if we need to hide Daisy," Gideon finished the thought. "Good. Show your mother." The riders were close enough now that Gideon could count them. 14, all armed, all moving with the coordination of men who'd done this before. Not minors or random hired guns, but professionals. Crow had sent his best. Mara returned, rifle in hand, face pale but determined. Daisy's in the cellar with water and food. She understands she needs to stay quiet no matter what she hears. How'd she take it? "She's scared. But she's a Callan. She'll hold." Mara moved to a window on the east side. "How many?" 14 that I can see. Could be more hanging back." Gideon checked his ammunition. 24 rounds for the rifle, another dozen for his pistol. Not enough for a prolonged fight, but then he wasn't planning on prolonged. "They'll try to talk first, offer terms. When that fails, they'll rush us." "What kind of terms?" "Hand over the evidence, probably promise to let us go." His mouth twisted. "We'd be dead within a mile." Luke had taken position at a north-facing window, the strongbox secured at his feet. "How do we play this?" "We don't hand over anything. We hold position, conserve ammunition, and make them work for every inch." Gideon glanced at the boy. "You're a good shot?" "Pa taught me. I can hit what I aim at." "Then aim careful. We don't have bullets to waste." The riders came to a halt 200 yards out, just beyond effective rifle range. Smart. They spread out in a loose arc, cutting off escape routes, establishing a perimeter. A single rider separated from the group, walking his horse forward slowly, hands visible and empty of weapons. The man was older than the others, gray-haired and lean, with the weathered look of someone who'd spent decades in the saddle. He stopped 100 yards out and called across the distance. "You in the ruins! I'm here to talk!" Gideon moved to the window where he could be seen but not easily shot. "So talk." "Name's Mercer. I work for Mr. Crow." The man's voice carried clearly in the still morning air. "You've got something that belongs to him. Hand it over, and you can ride out of here alive." "What we've got is evidence of murder, fraud, and theft spanning 20 years, Gideon shouted back. "Only place it's going is to a federal marshal in Cheyenne." Mercer shifted in his saddle. "You're making a mistake. Mr. Crow's a powerful man. He's got friends in high places. Even if you reach Cheyenne, even if you hand that evidence over, nothing's going to happen to him." "Maybe, but we're going to try anyway." "For what? A dead man's revenge? That woman and those children don't mean anything to you. Why die for strangers?" The question hung in the air. Gideon felt Mara and Luke both turn to look at him, waiting for his answer. "Because somebody should," he called back. "Because men like Crow only win when good people stand aside and let them. And because I'm done standing aside." Silence from Mercer. Then, slowly, the man turned his horse and rode back to the others. They clustered together, clearly discussing options, gesturing toward the ruins. That could have gone better, Mara said quietly. Could have gone worse. They haven't started shooting yet. Gideon checked his rifle again, making sure the action was clear. But they will. Question is whether they try to wait us out or rush us straight away. Luke's voice was tight. What would you do if you were them? Send a few men to keep us pinned. Send the rest to Cheyenne to cut off our destination. Wait us out until we run out of water or hope. Gideon paused. But Crow probably told them to get that evidence back fast before we can spread word, which means they'll rush us, probably within the hour. He was wrong about the timeline. They rushed within 10 minutes. It started with gunfire, scattered shots designed to keep heads down, make the defenders use ammunition. Gideon held his fire, watching as 4 riders broke from the main group and charged the ruins from the south, firing pistols as they came. Steady, he said. Let them get close. Mara's rifle cracked beside him, and one of the riders tumbled from his saddle. Luke fired a second later, his shot going wide but forcing another rider to veer off course. Gideon waited until the remaining 2 were 50 yards out, then fired twice in quick succession. Both riders went down. The charge broke, the surviving rider wheeling his horse and galloping back to safety. But the damage was done. 3 men down in the first assault, and the defenders had barely used a dozen rounds. Good shooting, Gideon said, but they'll come harder next time. The next time came from 2 directions simultaneously, 6 riders from the south, 4 from the east. Gideon shifted to cover the eastern approach while Mara and Luke focused south. The ruins echoed with gunfire, smoke drifting through the burned-out windows. Gideon dropped 1 rider, wounded another. Mara's rifle spoke with methodical precision, each shot deliberate. Luke fired 3 times, missed twice, but his third shot took a horse in the shoulder, sending rider and animal sprawling. The assault broke again, but this time the riders didn't retreat all the way. They took cover in gullies and behind rocks, maintaining a steady harassment fire that kept everyone pinned. They're settling in for a siege, Mara said, reloading, which means reinforcements are coming. Gideon scanned the landscape. Mercer's probably sent riders to get more men. We've got hours at best before we're completely outnumbered. Then what do we do? Before Gideon could answer, a bullet punched through the window frame inches from his head, showering him with stone chips. He ducked back, felt blood on his cheek where a fragment had cut him. Luke was at his side instantly. You hit? Just scratched. But when Gideon touched his ribs, his hand came away wet. He looked down, saw blood spreading across his shirt. The bullet hadn't missed after all. It had caught him along the left side, a deep graze that burned like fire. Mara saw it at the same time. Gideon? I'm fine. Just need it bound. But even as he said it, the room tilted slightly. Blood loss. Not critical yet, but it would be if they didn't stop it. Mara tore strips from her skirt, wrapped them tight around his ribs while Luke kept watch. The pressure helped, but Gideon could feel his strength leaking away with every heartbeat. You need rest, Mara said. I need to keep shooting. He pushed back to the window, raised his rifle. We stopped defending. They overrun us in minutes. Another assault came, then another, each one more cautious than the last. The attackers learning from their mistakes, using cover better, advancing by inches instead of yards. Gideon's ammunition dwindled. His wound throbbed with each movement. The sun climbed higher, turning the ruins into an oven. By noon, they'd held off 5 assaults and dropped 9 men, but the cost was showing. Gideon had maybe 8 rounds left. Mara was down to 6. Luke had fired his last bullet 20 minutes ago and now just watched, useless, while the adults fought. We can't hold much longer, Mara said what they were all thinking. Gideon knew she was right. He could feel his strength fading, see the exhaustion in her face. One more serious assault would break through, and then a sound cut through the gunfire. Distant but distinct. More hoofbeats. Coming from the north. Reinforcements for Crow. Had to be. The end was here. Gideon struggled to his feet, determined to die standing. Mara moved beside him, her last rounds loaded, ready for the final fight. Luke clutched the strongbox, prepared to run with it into the root cellar, to hide until he could escape with Daisy and deliver the evidence alone. But the riders that appeared over the northern ridge weren't wearing Crow's colors. They wore federal badges. Marshal Frank Brennan led a force of 20 armed deputies, and they hit Crow's men from behind like a hammer on an anvil. The siege broke instantly, Mercer's people scattering, some trying to fight, others running. The gunfire intensified briefly, then faded as Crow's surviving men threw down weapons and surrendered. Gideon slid down the wall, his rifle clattering from numb fingers. Mara was beside him instantly, pressing cloth to his wound, her voice tight with fear and relief. "You're going to be fine. The marshal's here. We made it. Gideon, stay with me." But consciousness was fading, the world going gray at the edges. The last thing Gideon saw before darkness took him was Luke, running toward the approaching lawmen, the strongbox held high like a trophy, his young voice ringing clear across the battlefield. "We've got the evidence. We've got everything." Then nothing. When Gideon woke, the first thing he registered was softness. A real bed, clean sheets, the smell of carbolic and laudanum. He opened his eyes to find himself in a small room with whitewashed walls and sunlight streaming through a window. Cheyenne. He was in Cheyenne. "Easy," Mara's voice, closer than expected. He turned his head to find her sitting beside the bed, exhaustion carved into every line of her face, but her eyes bright. "Doctor said you lost a lot of blood. You need to rest." "The children. Safe. Daisy's with Luke downstairs getting spoiled by the marshal's wife." A smile touched her lips. "They're fine. We're all fine." "The evidence?" "Delivered. Marshal Brennan has everything Thomas collected, plus our testimony about what Crow did." Her hand found his, squeezed gently. "It's over, Gideon. We made it." He absorbed this, trying to make sense of it. How'd Brennan know where to find us? He didn't. He was already riding north with a federal warrant for Crow. Apparently someone else had filed complaints, and the marshal had been building his own case. He saw the smoke from the gunfight and investigated. She laughed softly, the sound edged with hysteria. "Pure luck. Another hour and we would have been dead, but luck found us instead." Gideon's hand tightened on hers. "Crow?" "Arrested this morning in Montana. Brennan sent deputies with federal warrants. He's in custody now, awaiting trial." Her eyes shone with unshed tears. "It's really over. Thomas's evidence, combined with what the marshal already had, it's enough to put Crow away for the rest of his life." The weight that had been pressing on Gideon's chest since the moment he'd found Mara collapsed on his porch began to lift. Not completely, he'd carry scars from this, physical and otherwise. But the immediate danger had passed. They'd survived. More than that, they'd won. "You should have left me," he said quietly, "taken the children and run when you had the chance." "And missed the sight of you telling 14 armed men to go to hell?" She shook her head. "Not a chance. Besides, someone had to make sure you didn't bleed out before help arrived." "Mara, hush, rest. We've got time now. All the time in the world." She settled back in her chair, her hands still wrapped around his. "Sleep. I'll be here when you wake." He wanted to argue, to say more, but exhaustion pulled at him like a tide. His eyes closed, and this time the darkness was soft, welcoming, without the edge of fear that had colored it before. When he woke again, it was evening. Luke sat where Mara had been, the boy's face serious as he studied something in his hands. The brass key, Gideon realized, the key that had unlocked everything. "Your mother?" Luke looked up, relief flooding his features. "Downstairs with Daisy. Marshall wanted to talk to her about the trial. I said I'd sit with you." "You did good, Luke. Your father would be proud." The boy's eyes reddened, but he didn't look away. "You think so?" "I know so. You protected your family, delivered the evidence, helped bring down a killer. That's not a small thing for anyone, let alone someone your age." Luke was quiet for a moment. Then, "The marshal says we'll have to testify. Tell a court what happened, what we know. Might take months before the trial's done." "You scared?" "A little, but Brennan says we'll be protected, and Crow's locked up now. Can't hurt us anymore." The boy turned the key over in his hands. "Funny. I carried this for 3 years, never knowing what it opened. Now that I know, now that we've used it, It just feels like a piece of metal. It's more than that. It's proof that your father's sacrifice mattered, that standing up to evil, even at cost to yourself, can change things. Gideon shifted, wincing at the pain in his side. You keep that key, Luke. When you're older, when you've got children of your own, you can tell them about the summer you and your mother and sister walked through hell and came out the other side. Tell them about the rancher who helped you. Tell them how your father's courage saved lives he'd never meet. Luke nodded slowly, slipping the key back into his pocket. Will you be there when we tell those stories? The question hung in the air, heavy with implication. They'd survived the fight, but what came after? Mara would need to rebuild her life. The children would need stability, safety, a place to call home. And Gideon, what did he need? I don't know, he admitted. Haven't thought that far ahead. Well, you should. Luke stood, moved toward the door. Because Ma says you're family now, and families stick together. He left before Gideon could respond, his footsteps fading down the stairs. Family. The word echoed in Gideon's mind as evening deepened into night. He'd lost his family 6 years ago, lost the right to call himself part of anything larger than his own solitary existence. But these three people, a widow, a fierce boy, a small girl who'd learned to be brave when bravery was all that stood between her and death, they'd somehow worked their way past his defenses, had become something more than strangers he'd helped, had become what Luke said, family. The door opened and Mara slipped in quietly, carrying a tray with soup and bread. Thought you might be hungry. Starving. He let her help him sit up, accepted the bowl. Luke says I'm family now. She paused, met his eyes. He's not wrong. You risked everything for us, Gideon. Gave up your home, your safety, nearly died protecting strangers who had no claim on you. That's not something you do for people you don't care about. And you? What do you think? Mara sat on the edge of the bed, her hand resting lightly on his arm. I think Thomas would have wanted someone like you in our lives. Someone strong and stubborn and unwilling to back down when the right thing needs doing. She smiled softly. And I think, when you're healed and the trial's done and we've got our lives back, I think I'd like to see what comes next, if you're willing. Gideon looked at her, really looked at her, and saw past the exhaustion and fear to the woman beneath. Strong, resilient, someone who'd walked through fire and refused to be consumed, someone worth building a life with. I'm willing, he said quietly. If you are. Her smile brightened, and for the first time since he'd found her collapsed on his porch, Gideon saw real joy in her eyes. Not relief, not gratitude, but genuine happiness. Then we'll figure it out together, all of us. She stood, started toward the door, then paused. Rest now. Tomorrow, Marshal Brennan wants our full testimony. The fight's not quite over yet. But we're winning. Yes. She looked back at him, and in her eyes he saw the same fierce determination that had kept her walking through summer heat with 2 children. We're winning. The door closed softly, and Gideon lay back against the pillows, feeling his body begin the slow work of healing. Outside, Cheyenne settled into evening rhythms, voices, wagon wheels, the ordinary sounds of a town at peace. Somewhere in this town, Silas Crow sat in a cell, his empire crumbling, his crimes finally catching up with him. Somewhere, federal marshals were preparing a case that would ensure he never hurt anyone again. And here, in this small room in this ordinary boarding house, a man who'd spent 6 years hiding from his past was beginning to imagine a future with a woman who'd proven stronger than summer heat and fear combined, with children who'd learned courage by necessity but deserved the chance to learn joy instead, with the possibility of redemption earned not through isolation but through standing when standing mattered most. The pain in Gideon's side throbbed with each breath, a reminder of how close they'd come to losing everything. But beneath the pain was something else, something he hadn't felt in 6 long years. Hope. Real, solid, deserved hope that maybe the worst was behind them. That maybe the choices he'd made, the choice to help instead of hide, to fight instead of flee, had been the right ones after all. Outside his window, stars began appearing one by one across the vast Wyoming sky. Inside, Gideon closed his eyes and let exhaustion claim him, secure in the knowledge that when he woke, he wouldn't be alone. Would never be alone again. 3 days passed before Gideon was strong enough to leave the boarding house. 3 days of healing, testimony, and watching Marshall Brennan's case against Silas Crow take shape like a fortress built stone by methodical stone. The federal lawman worked with the precision of someone who understood that men like Crow didn't fall easily, that every piece of evidence needed to be documented, verified, made ironclad against expensive lawyers and bought judges. Thomas Callan's journals formed the foundation. 20 years of careful documentation, names, dates, amounts, witnesses, deeds that showed property transferred under duress, account books proving bribes paid to sheriffs and territorial officials, affidavits from men who'd later disappeared, their statements preserved in Thomas's meticulous handwriting. And woven through it all, the story of an empire built on fraud, maintained through violence, protected by a web of corruption that reached into courtrooms and legislative chambers across 3 territories. Your husband was thorough, Brennan told Mara on the 4th morning, spreading documents across his desk. Most men gather evidence haphazard, miss connections, can't prove chain of custody. But Thomas, he built this like a prosecutor would. Every claim backed by 2 sources minimum, every financial record cross-referenced. He even anticipated defense arguments and documented rebuttals. Mara's fingers traced her husband's handwriting on one of the journals, her eyes distant. He spent 6 months on this, every night after work, every Sunday afternoon. Luke and I barely saw him. I thought, her voice caught, I thought he was pulling away from us. Didn't realize he was trying to protect us. He protected a lot more than just you. Brennan tapped a page listing families displaced by fraudulent land seizures. 43 families that we can prove. Probably twice that many we can't. Thomas gave them justice when no one else would. Gideon, still moving carefully because of his wound, studied the marshal's weathered face. How long until trial? Federal prosecutors saying 4 months minimum. Crow's lawyers are already filing motions, trying to delay, trying to get charges dismissed. Brennan's jaw set hard. But we've got him. Even if half this evidence gets thrown out, we've still got enough to put him away for 20 years. And the family? Gideon nodded toward where Luke and Daisy sat on a bench outside the office, the boy reading to his sister from a worn storybook. They'll need protection until the trial's done. Already arranged, federal safe house in Denver, marshals on rotation, new identities if necessary. Brennan paused, though Mrs. Callan's been resistant to that last part. Mara looked up sharply. I'm not changing our names. Thomas died as a Callan. His children will honor that name, not hide from it. Ma'am, with respect, Crow's got associates who might... Let them try. Steel rang through her voice. We've run enough. Hidden enough. From now on, we stand as who we are. Brennan glanced at Gideon, who just shrugged. He'd learned days ago not to argue when Mara got that tone. The woman had walked through summer heat until she collapsed, had faced down hired guns, had held her ground while bullets flew around her children. She'd earned the right to make her own choices about fear. Denver's still the safest option until trial, the marshal said. And you're welcome to stay, Mr. Hale. Federal government's grateful for what you did. We could use a man like you, someone willing to stand against corruption. Appreciate the offer. Gideon moved to the window, looked out at Cheyenne's main street, where ordinary life continued, wagons rolling, merchants hawking, children playing. But I'm done with fighting for a while, done with running too. Time to figure out what comes after. And what does come after? Brennan asked. Gideon didn't have an answer. His ranch was 3 days' ride north, probably being picked over by scavengers by now, his cattle scattered, his careful isolation shattered beyond repair. He couldn't go back to that life even if he wanted to. The man who'd hidden there for 6 years didn't exist anymore. But what did that leave? The question followed him as he walked back to the boarding house, as he climbed the stairs slowly, favoring his wounded side. He found Mara in the room they'd given her and the children, packing their few belongings into a canvas bag. Leaving already? He asked from the doorway. Brennan wants us in Denver by week's end. Says it's safer, easier to protect. She didn't look up from her packing. Luke's excited. He's never seen a real city before. Daisy keeps asking if there will be a place to play. And you? Now she looked up, and Gideon saw the uncertainty in her eyes. I don't know what I am. grateful to be alive, terrified about the trial, angry that Thomas isn't here to see Crow brought down. She sat on the edge of the bed, the canvas bag forgotten, and confused about what comes after, where we go when it's done, how we build a life after everything that's happened. Gideon moved into the room, settled carefully into the chair by the window. His side ached, a constant reminder of how close they'd all come to dying. Your husband's family property, the homestead, it's still legally yours, isn't it? In theory. But there's a mining company working it, and I don't have money to fight them in court. She laughed bitterly. Everything Thomas and I saved went to running, to staying one step ahead of Crow. We're destitute, Gideon. Federal government's paying for this room, for our food. Without that, we'd be on the street. Brennan mentioned compensation. Federal government pays witnesses in major cases, especially when they've lost property or income because of their testimony. Even if that's true, it won't be enough to reclaim the homestead. Won't be enough to start over. She looked at him directly. I know what you're thinking, that you'll help, that you'll find some way to make things right. But you've already given us everything, Gideon. Your home, your safety, nearly your life. I can't ask for more. You're not asking, I'm offering. He leaned forward, ignoring the pull in his wounded side. I've got money saved. 6 years of living alone, no one to spend it on. Not a fortune, but enough to buy land, stock it, build something. Gideon, let me finish. His voice was gentle but firm. I spent 6 years hiding because I thought I didn't deserve anything good. Thought the mistakes I made, the people who died because of my choices, meant I should live alone and die alone. But you and your children, you showed me that's not how it works. That sometimes you get a second chance if you're brave enough to take it. Mara's eyes were bright with unshed tears. What are you saying? I'm saying that ranch of mine is gone. Can't go back even if I wanted to. But there's homestead land available in Colorado, good grazing country near the mountains. We could start fresh there, all of us. He paused, choosing his words carefully. Not as charity, not as debt repaid, but as family building something together. Family. She repeated the word like testing its weight. You'd really want that? A widow with 2 children and enough baggage to fill a freight wagon? I'd want exactly that. If you'd have a broken-down rancher with scars he can't talk about and a habit of being too stubborn for his own good. She laughed, the sound breaking through tears. Luke already said you're family. Daisy asks about you every morning, and I... She stopped, swallowed hard. I think Thomas would approve. Would want someone like you in our lives. Someone who'd stand when standing was hard. Then it's settled. Gideon stood, offered his hand. We testify against Crow, so we see him put away where he can't hurt anyone again, and then we go to Colorado. Start over. Build something good on land that doesn't have ghosts buried in it. Mara took his hand, let him pull her to her feet. They stood close in the small room, and Gideon saw past the exhaustion and fear to the woman she'd been before Crow, before running, before watching her husband murdered. Saw the strength and warmth that adversity had tried to destroy, but hadn't quite managed. I won't replace Thomas, he said quietly. Won't try to be a father to Luke and Daisy if they don't want that. They already see you as one. She smiled through tears. Luke told me yesterday that you're the bravest man he's ever known. That you stood up to 14 hired guns to protect us. That's not something children forget. I just did what needed doing. And that's exactly why they love you. Why I... She stopped, looked away. Why I think we could build something good together, if you're patient with us. If you understand that some days will be hard, that grief doesn't follow schedules, that healing takes time. I've got nothing but time, and patience is something you learn living alone for 6 years. He touched her face gently, turning her back toward him. We'll take it slow. Let the children adjust. Let you figure out who you are without fear chasing you. And when you're ready, if you're ready, we'll build that life we talked about. She leaned into his touch, eyes closing. Thank you for saving us, for standing with us, for giving us a future when we thought we'd lost everything. You saved me too, don't forget that. The moment stretched, comfortable and warm, until small footsteps on the stairs announced Luke's approach. Mara stepped back, wiping her eyes quickly. By the time the boy appeared in the doorway, she was composed, though her hand remained tangled with Gideon's. Marshall says we need to give more testimony tomorrow. Luke's face was serious beyond his years. Says the prosecutor wants to make sure our story's straight before trial. Then we'll tell it straight, Gideon said. The truth's got a way of standing firm when lies crumble. Pa used to say something like that. The boy moved into the room, dropped onto the bed beside his mother's packing. Said lies are like houses built on sand. First storm tears them down, but truth's got bedrock underneath. Your father was a wise man. He was. Luke looked between them, clearly sensing something had shifted. Are you coming to Denver with us? The marshal said you might. Gideon glanced at Mara, saw her slight nod. For a while. Make sure you're settled, safe. Then I've got some business to tend to, selling my ranch, settling accounts, but I'll be back before the trial. And after. The boy's voice was carefully neutral, but hope flickered in his eyes. After, we're thinking about Colorado. Fresh start for all of us. Gideon watched Luke's face carefully. If that sits right with you. The hope blazed bright now. You mean it? You'd stay with us? Permanent-like? Permanent as anything gets in this world. Your mother and I, we talked about building something together. Ranch, maybe. Good land, honest work, place where you and Daisy can grow up without fear. He paused. But only if you're amenable. This is your family. I won't force myself where I'm not wanted. Luke was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood, crossed to where Gideon sat, and without warning wrapped his arms around the man's shoulders. You're wanted. Pa would have wanted it too. He'd have liked knowing someone strong was looking after us. Gideon returned the embrace carefully, mindful of his wound but unable to deny the fierce affection from the boy who'd proven braver than most grown men. I'll do my best. Can't promise to be perfect. Can't promise I won't make mistakes. But I can promise I'll stand with you, whatever comes. That's all Pa ever promised too, and it was enough. Luke pulled back, swiping at his eyes. I'll go tell Daisy. She's been worried you'd leave once we got to Denver. He ran out before either adult could respond, his footsteps clattering down the stairs with the resilience of youth. Mara watched him go, then turned back to Gideon. You just made a 10-year-old boy very happy. Made myself pretty happy, too. Gideon stood slowly, testing his wounded side. Didn't realize how much I'd missed having people to care about, until I had them again. Welcome to family life. It's messier than living alone, louder than silence, and infinitely better than either. She moved to the window, looking out at the street below. 4 months until trial, then however long it takes to settle Thomas's estate, fight for the homestead if we want it, or let it go if we don't. Could be a year before we're truly free to start over. A year's nothing. We've got the rest of our lives after that. The weeks that followed fell into a rhythm dictated by Marshal Brennan's schedule and the prosecutor's needs. Testimony given and recorded, evidence cataloged and verified, witnesses interviewed and their stories corroborated. Mara proved invaluable, her memories of Thomas's work filling gaps in the documentation. Luke provided crucial details about the night his father died. His young voice steady as he described watching Crow's men stage an accident that was clearly murder. Daisy, mercifully, had been too young to remember clearly. She spoke to prosecutors about running, about being scared, about the long walk through summer heat. But her testimony was gentle, appropriate for a child, and the lawyers handled her with care that spoke of men who had children of their own. Denver proved to be everything Luke had hoped, a real city with buildings 3 stories tall, streets crowded with wagons and people, opportunities around every corner. The federal safe house was a modest home on a quiet street, guarded discreetly by marshals who rotated shifts but never left the family unprotected. Gideon stayed for 3 weeks, making sure they were settled and secure, before riding north to deal with his ranch. He found it much as expected. Cattle scattered, cabin ransacked, everything of value stolen. But the land itself remained, and he was able to sell it to a neighboring rancher for a fair price. Not what it was worth before Crow's men had made it a battlefield, but enough. Combined with his savings and the compensation the federal government provided for his assistance in the case, he had sufficient funds to buy good land in Colorado and stock it properly, enough to build a house large enough for a growing family, enough to start over right. He was back in Denver before the autumn leaves began to turn, and the look on Mara's face when he walked through the door of the safe house told him everything he needed to know about where he belonged. The trial began in October, a cool morning that promised winter wasn't far behind. Silas Crow stood before a federal judge looking smaller than Gideon remembered, his expensive suit unable to hide the fact that his empire had crumbled. The man's lawyers fought hard, challenging evidence, questioning witnesses, trying every trick that money could buy. But Thomas Callan's documentation held firm. Witness after witness testified to Crow's crimes. Families displaced told their stories. Men who'd been bribed admitted their complicity. And through it all, the journals stood as unshakable proof of systematic fraud spanning 2 decades. Mara testified for 3 days, her voice never wavering as she described her husband's investigation and murder. Luke took the stand for 2 hours, describing what he'd seen that night with the clear-eyed honesty of a child who'd learned that truth mattered more than comfort. Gideon's testimony was brief but damning. He described finding the family, being threatened by Crow's men, the siege at the ruins. He spoke plainly, without embellishment, and the jury listened with the attention of people hearing something that rang true. The verdict came down on a cold November morning. Guilty on 43 counts of fraud, 14 counts of conspiracy to commit murder, 11 counts of murder itself, and dozens of lesser charges that added years to an already insurmountable sentence. The judge sentenced Silas Crow to life in federal prison with no possibility of parole, plus an additional 99 years for crimes too numerous to be served concurrently. It was, the newspaper said, one of the longest sentences handed down in territorial history. Crow showed no emotion as the sentence was read, but as marshals led him from the courtroom, he locked eyes with Mara for just a moment. Whatever he saw there, triumph, relief, justice finally served, made him look away first. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed the family, shouting questions, demanding statements. Marshal Brennan held them back while Mara, Gideon, and the children made their way to a waiting carriage. "How do you feel?" one reporter shouted. Mara paused, turned back. "I feel like my husband can finally rest. Like his sacrifice meant something. Like justice, however delayed, still matters." She looked at Gideon, at Luke, and Daisy. "And I feel grateful to the people who stood with us when we had nothing, who risked everything so that a good man's work wouldn't be buried with him." She said nothing more, just climbed into the carriage with her family and let the driver take them away from the courthouse, away from the trial, away from the chapter of their lives defined by fear and running. The next morning, they began the journey to Colorado. The land Gideon had chosen was everything he'd promised: rolling grassland backed by mountains, with a creek running clear and cold through the center of the property. Good grazing, good water, good soil for a garden. Room enough for cattle and horses, for children to run and play, for a family to grow without feeling crowded. They spent the winter building. Gideon and hired hands from the nearest town raised a house from timber and stone, solid and warm, with enough rooms for everyone and then some. Mara planted a kitchen garden that would bloom come spring. Luke learned ranching from Gideon, soaking up knowledge like earth soaking up rain. Daisy made friends with neighbor children and slowly forgot what it felt like to be afraid all the time. By spring, the house was finished, the first cattle were grazing the grassland, and the Callan family, which now included Gideon Hale, though no formal adoption or marriage had yet occurred, was beginning to feel like they'd always lived here. One evening in April, as the sun painted the mountains gold and purple, Gideon found Mara sitting on the porch, watching her children play in the distance. Luke was teaching Daisy to ride, his patience with his little sister infinite, his voice carrying clearly across the grassland. "Penny for your thoughts," Gideon said, settling beside her. "Just thinking how different this is from a year ago. How much has changed." She leaned into him, comfortable with the contact in a way that had developed slowly over months. "We were running then, dying. I thought we'd never stop, never find peace. And now I'm watching my son teach my daughter to ride on land that's ours, with a good man beside me and a future that doesn't terrify me." She looked up at him. "Thomas would be amazed, grateful. He'd love this place. I wish I could have known him. You would have been friends, Both stubborn, both unwilling to back down when something's wrong. She smiled. Though you're quieter. Thomas loved to talk, loved to debate and discuss. You're more the strong, silent type. Learn to be quiet living alone. Hard habit to break. Don't break it on my account. I like that you only speak when you've got something worth saying. She was quiet for a moment, then, I've been thinking about something I wanted to discuss with you before deciding. All right. The homestead, Thomas's family property. The mining companies finished their survey. Turns out there's no copper worth extracting. They're willing to sell the land back for what they paid the previous owner. She watched his face carefully. It's not much money. And it would mean owning two properties, which is complicated. But it was Thomas's childhood home, his grandfather's legacy. What does Luke think? He wants it. Wants to know that place will stay in the family, but he also says it's my decision, that he'll understand either way. Gideon considered. How big is the property? 300 acres, good grazing, access to the river. We could run cattle there, hire someone to manage it, or we could let Luke have it when he's grown, give him something to build on. Sounds like you've already decided. I have, but I wanted your blessing. This is your money too now, or will be if we... She stopped, suddenly uncertain. Gideon understood what she was asking. They'd been building toward this for months, growing closer with each day, but neither had spoken it aloud. The question of what they were to each other, of where this was heading. He took her hand, felt her fingers intertwine with his. I think we should buy the homestead, keep it in the family, honor Thomas's memory by making sure his grandfather's work doesn't get lost. He paused. And I think we should make this official, you and me. A real family, not just people living together. Her breath caught. Are you asking what I think you're asking? If you think I'm asking you to marry me, then yes. He turned to face her fully. I know it's only been a year. I know you might not be ready. But Mara, you and your children are the best thing that's happened to me in a decade. I want to build a life with you. Want to be a father to Luke and Daisy if they'll have me. Want to wake up every morning knowing I'm exactly where I belong. Tears spilled down her cheeks, but she was smiling. Yes. 1,000 times yes. Thomas would approve. The children already call you Pa when they think I'm not listening. And I love you, Gideon Hale. Love your stubbornness and your kindness and the way you stood between my family and death when you didn't have to. He kissed her then, gentle and sure, and felt the last pieces of his broken life click into place. They'd both lost so much. Both carried scars that would never fully heal. But together, building something new on this good land under these wide skies, they had a chance at happiness that neither had expected to find again. When they pulled apart, Luke was watching from across the yard, Daisy still perched on her horse. The boy's grin split his face, and he whooped loud enough to startle birds from nearby trees. Told you, he shouted to his sister. Told you they'd get married. Daisy clapped her hands in delight, nearly losing her balance before Luke steadied her. How long have they known? Mara asked, laughing through tears. Since Denver, probably. Children notice things adults think they're hiding. Gideon stood, offered his hand. Come on, let's go tell them official-like. They walked across the grassland together as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the world in shades of gold and rose. Luke and Daisy met them halfway, questions tumbling over each other, excitement making them bounce and spin. Does this mean you're really staying? Daisy asked, grabbing Gideon's hand. Really staying. Forever. Can I call you Pa? I'd be honored. Luke's eyes shone with unshed tears, but his smile never wavered. Pa would have liked this. Would have said you earned it, standing with us the way you did. Your father earned it, Gideon corrected gently. Everything we have, everything we're building, it started with him. With his courage to stand against wrong. We're just finishing what he started. Then we'll do it together. Luke's voice was firm, mature beyond his years. All of us. The way families should. They stood together in the fading light, 4 people bound not by blood alone, but by shared hardship and triumph, by the choice to stand when standing was hard, by the refusal to let fear and evil win. In the distance, cattle grazed peacefully. Smoke rose from the chimney of their new home. The mountains stood eternal watch over land that had finally stopped running, had finally found peace, And as stars began appearing one by one across the vast Colorado sky, Gideon Hale understood that redemption wasn't something you found alone in silence. It was something you built with people who'd seen your worst and chosen to stand beside you anyway. It was this moment, this family, this chance to do better and be better than the man he'd been before. It was home. The wedding took place in June, a simple ceremony in the town's small church with Marshal Brennan standing as witness and half the county in attendance. Mara wore a dress she'd sewn herself, simple but beautiful, with wildflowers in her hair that Daisy had picked that morning. Luke stood proud beside Gideon, holding the rings they'd purchased in town, his young face solemn with the weight of responsibility. When the preacher asked if anyone objected, silence filled the church. When he pronounced them husband and wife, the congregation erupted in cheers. Afterward, at the celebration held in the churchyard, neighbors brought food and music. Luke danced with his mother, then with Daisy, then with several young ladies from town who made him blush. Gideon found himself surrounded by men wanting to shake his hand, to thank him for standing against corruption, to welcome him properly to the community. As evening fell and lanterns were lit, Gideon and Mara slipped away from the celebration, walking to the edge of the property where they could see their land stretching away under the stars. "Happy?" he asked. "More than I thought possible a year ago." She leaned against him, his arm around her shoulders. "We made it, Gideon. Through everything that tried to break us, we made it to the other side." "We did. And we'll keep making it one day at a time for the rest of our lives." They stood together in the darkness, listening to music and laughter drifting from the celebration, watching stars wheel overhead. The future stretched before them uncertain, but no longer terrifying. There would be hard days ahead. Grief didn't disappear just because happiness returned, and healing was measured in years, not months. But they would face those days together, as family, as partners who'd proven they could survive anything as long as they stood united. And somewhere, Gideon liked to think, Thomas Callan was watching and smiling. His sacrifice had mattered. His courage had saved not just his family, but countless others. His legacy would live on in his children, in the ranch they'd build on his grandfather's land, in the justice that had finally caught up with a man who thought himself untouchable. The night deepened. The celebration continued, and two people who'd found each other in the worst moment of their lives stood together watching stars, grateful for second chances and the courage to take them. In the end, that was all any of them could ask for. Not perfect happiness, not lives unmarred by sorrow, but the chance to build something good on land that didn't have ghosts buried in it. The chance to choose love over fear, hope over despair, standing over running. The chance to prove that sometimes, just sometimes, the good guys really did win. And in the warm Colorado night, with music playing and family laughing and a future full of possibilities stretching ahead, that was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything.